The Mafia boss's mother collapsed, and only the black nanny knew what to do. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The grand mansion was silent, save for the soft rustling of the curtains as the wind swept through the cracks in the window. In the midst of the extravagance and luxury that defined the Romano family, a sense of calm was suddenly shattered. The Mafia boss's mother, Maria Romano, had collapsed right in the middle of the lavish dining room during a family gathering. Guests who had been sipping wine and chatting casually froze, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. Maria, once a regal and imposing figure, now lay motionless on the floor, her frail body trembling as the blood drained from her face. Panic began to spread among the guests as no one knew what to do. The servants stood frozen, too afraid to act without instructions, their eyes darting toward the grand entrance for guidance. And then, there was a woman who had always been a shadow in the background, the black nanny. Despite her humble position in the family, her knowledge, strength, and grace were far beyond what anyone had ever expected. Her name was Ella. She had worked for the Romano family for 5 years, tending to the children and ensuring everything ran smoothly, yet never drawing attention to herself. Ella had witnessed many things in the mansion. She had seen the way the family operated, the unspoken rules of power and dominance, and the way Maria Romano ruled the household with an iron fist. But she had also witnessed moments of fragility, of vulnerability, hidden behind the walls of wealth and status. And now, with Maria collapsed in front of her, Ella knew that this moment could change everything. She moved swiftly to the side of Maria, her hands steady as she knelt beside the matriarch of the Romano family. The guests watched in silence, unsure whether to intervene or wait for the family to react. Ella felt the weight of their gazes but paid them no mind. She had a job to do, and this was the moment to prove her worth. In the chaos that had erupted, there was one thing that no one had expected. Ella was the only one who knew exactly what to do. As the silence deepened, she placed a hand on Maria's forehead and began to speak softly, urging her to wake up, her voice filled with a calm authority that contrasted with the tension around her. It was a moment of pure instinct, a woman who had seen life and death before, now facing another crisis. And as she gently lifted Maria's head, cradling her in her arms, something unexpected happened. The power dynamic in the room shifted. The Mafia boss, Dominic Romano, entered the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, and when they landed on Ella, a mix of surprise and concern flickered in his gaze. He had never expected this woman, this quiet figure who worked in the background, to be the one holding his mother in her arms, saving her life. He had always assumed the servants were just that, invisible. But Ella, in that moment, was the one in control, the one who could save his mother. And as he stepped forward, his expression hardened. He realized that this woman, who he had often ignored, was the one who held the key to his family's survival. How had she known what to do? Why was she the only one able to remain calm in such a chaotic situation? Dominic's mind raced as he tried to process the turn of events. But for now, all he could do was watch, helpless, as Ella's steady hands worked to save the life of his mother. The moment marked a turning point in their relationship. For the first time, Dominic saw Ella not as just a servant, but as a person of power and worth. What would happen next? Would Ella's actions change the course of their lives forever? Stay tuned to find out. I will be honest, Dominic thought as he stood still, observing Ella work on his mother. He had always kept his distance from the help, seeing them as just servants in his world. But tonight, everything had changed. His mother, the woman who had shaped him into the man he was, had collapsed before his eyes, and it was Ella, the nanny, who had stepped up to save her. He had never seen her in such a light, and it made him uneasy. What was it about her that had made her the only person capable of keeping her calm in the chaos? She wasn't just a maid. She was something more. The next morning, the mansion was still. The usual sounds of servants bustling about the house were replaced by an unsettling silence. Dominic had spent the entire night in his office, his mind racing, reflecting on what had happened. His mother, Maria, was stable now, but the events of the night had changed him in ways he couldn't quite explain. Ella had saved her life. And yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just her actions that had left an impact on him. It was her presence, her strength, and the undeniable way she had stepped up in the moment of crisis, something no one else had done. No one had expected her to be the one to save the day. The more Dominic reflected on the situation, the more he couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that he had underestimated her for far too long. The image of her kneeling beside his mother, so calm and steady, stayed with him. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. He looked up, startled, but when the door opened, it was only his head of security, Luca, who entered with a polite bow. "Sir, the doctor is here to check on your mother," Luca said, his voice even. Dominic nodded and dismissed him with a quick wave. He needed to clear his mind. After a few moments, he stood up from his desk and walked toward the grand staircase, the sounds of the mansion slowly returning to normal. The mansion was full of staff, but Ella was nowhere to be seen. She was always working in the background, never seeking attention. And yet, last night, she had done the impossible. She had saved his mother. As Dominic descended the stairs, his gaze automatically shifted to the kitchen. He was drawn to the space where he had seen her before, moving quietly, making everything seem so effortless. It wasn't until he saw her standing by the sink that he realized just how much he had been thinking about her. Ella stood there, her back to him, scrubbing a pot with methodical precision. She had no idea he was watching her. As Dominic approached, he couldn't help but notice the way her presence filled the space. Even in silence, she exuded a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the past 24 hours. He cleared his throat, and Ella immediately turned, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly, as though nothing had happened. But Dominic couldn't ignore the way her eyes briefly flicked toward his mother's room, as if checking on her well-being. He hadn't realized how much he had come to rely on her during this time. "Good morning," Dominic replied, his voice softer than he had intended. There was an awkward pause, a moment where neither of them spoke, and then Dominic took a step forward, his gaze holding hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but sincere, "for what you did last night." Ella's expression softened, and for a brief moment, she didn't seem like just a servant. She seemed like something more, something he couldn't quite place. "I was just doing my job, sir," she replied, her tone humble, yet there was something in her eyes that told Dominic she didn't believe it was just a job. He wanted to say more, to thank her again, but the words felt stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded, before turning and walking away. The tension in the air lingered long after he had left the kitchen. Dominic's mind was racing. He had never been one to get close to anyone, least of all the staff. But Ella had changed that. She had changed him, and he didn't know what to do with the feelings that had been awakened inside him. As he returned to his office, he found himself questioning everything. The power dynamics in his family had always been clear. He was the boss, the one who controlled everything. But Ella's actions last night had shattered that illusion. She had taken control in a way he never expected, and for the first time, he was left wondering if perhaps she wasn't just a part of the background, as he had always assumed. She had earned his respect, and maybe, just maybe, something more. For now he couldn't allow himself to dwell on it. There were bigger problems at hand. His mother needed time to recover, and he had a family empire to manage. But the thought of Ella stayed with him, and as the day went on, he found himself wondering if the woman who had saved his mother's life could be the one to change everything for him. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The house felt different now, as if the usual buzz of activity had been replaced with an underlying tension that no one could ignore. Dominic moved through his day as he always had, distant, controlling, never allowing his emotions to show. But that night, something changed. He could feel Ella's presence in the house more keenly now, even though she maintained the same quiet demeanor she always had. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was something else. Dominic didn't know what to make of it. He had lived his entire life believing that power and control were the only things that mattered. But now, as he walked through the halls of his mansion, he realized that there was something about Ella that made him question everything he knew. He had always thought of her as just another person in the background of his life. But after what she had done for his mother, After the way she had remained calm and steady when everyone else was losing their heads, he couldn't ignore the shift in their dynamic. It was as if she had taken a piece of his soul, something he had kept hidden from everyone, and she had exposed it with a single action. That night, as Dominic sat at his desk, going over paperwork, he found himself thinking about Ella more than he cared to admit. Her presence lingered in his mind like a ghost, pulling him in, making him reconsider everything. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Without looking up, he spoke. "Come in." The door creaked open, and he didn't need to look to know it was her. "Sir." Ella's voice was calm, almost too calm, as if she had anticipated his reaction. Dominic looked up, his gaze meeting hers, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. She wasn't just a nanny, he reminded himself. She had saved his mother's life. She was someone who had earned his respect in ways he hadn't thought possible. "What is it?" Dominic asked, his voice colder than he intended. Ella took a step forward, holding a small tray with a cup of tea. "Your mother requested that I bring you this," she said, her tone neutral. Dominic didn't know what to say. He didn't want to acknowledge that he had been thinking about her for the past few days. He didn't want to admit that she had been the one person to get through to him, the one person who had broken down the walls he had spent years building around himself. "Thank you," he said, finally, taking the cup from her hand. She nodded and turned to leave, but something made him pause. "Ella." She stopped, her back still facing him. He wasn't sure what had come over him, but the words spilled out before he could stop them. "You did well, the other night," he said, his voice softer than usual. Ella turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. "It was nothing, sir. Just doing my job." Dominic felt a knot form in his stomach. Her humility only made him feel more exposed. "No, it was more than that," he replied, standing up and walking toward her. "You saved my mother's life. That's not nothing." Ella looked down at the floor, her expression unreadable. "I did what anyone would do in that situation," she said quietly. Dominic's chest tightened as he watched her, unsure of what to say next. He wanted to say more, to thank her properly, but something held him back. "You should go back to your duties," he said, his voice returning to its usual coldness. Ella nodded and left the room without another word. Dominic watched her go, his thoughts swirling in a mixture of confusion and admiration. He had always prided himself on his ability to control everything, to manipulate situations to his advantage. But with Ella, he felt like he was losing control. He didn't know how to handle it. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to do next. As the evening wore on, Dominic found himself unable to focus on his work. He kept thinking about Ella, her steady hands, her quiet strength. She wasn't just a servant to him anymore. She was someone he respected, someone he couldn't ignore. He had never allowed himself to feel this way about anyone, especially not someone in her position. But something about her had changed the way he saw the world, and he didn't know how to reconcile that with the man he had always been. The next morning, Dominic decided he couldn't keep avoiding it. He had to talk to her. He had to understand what was happening between them. And maybe, just maybe, he had to face the fact that he had begun to see her in a way he hadn't thought possible. Ella was in the kitchen when he arrived, preparing breakfast for the family. She didn't seem surprised to see him, but there was a quiet tension in the air as he stepped into the room. "We need to talk," Dominic said, his voice steady but firm. Ella paused, turning to face him. "About what, sir?" she asked, her tone neutral. Dominic hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. "About last night. About what you did for my mother," he said, his gaze locked on hers. Ella lowered her eyes, but she didn't back away. "I told you, sir. It was nothing." "No," Dominic said, his voice rising slightly. "It was something. It was everything." The words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. Ella looked up at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And then, slowly, Ella stepped forward. "You don't need to thank me, Dominic," she said softly. "I just did what needed to be done." Dominic's heart raced as he met her gaze. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to feel. And in that moment, he realized that Ella had completely thrown off his world, and there was no going back. The tension between them was palpable. Dominic stood in the kitchen, his mind racing as he tried to process the words that had just left his mouth. Ella, standing a few feet away, had lowered her gaze again, her hands still moving to prepare the morning meal, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. For the first time in his life, Dominic found himself questioning the very rules he had lived by, rules of control, dominance, and distance. She was no longer just the nanny. She was someone who had crossed a line, someone who had managed to break through the wall he had carefully built around himself for years. His thoughts were interrupted by Ella's soft voice. "You don't need to thank me, Dominic," she said, her words calm, almost soothing. "I just did what needed to be done." Dominic swallowed hard, his throat tight. Her words seemed so simple, yet they carried weight that he could feel pressing down on him. He had never met someone who could act so selflessly and yet maintain such composure. It was disorienting, and the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He had always kept his distance from the people around him, especially from those who worked for him. But Ella had changed that. The way she had stepped up when his mother was in danger, the way she had handled the situation without hesitation, he couldn't ignore it. He couldn't push it aside. And now, standing in the same room with her, he felt a shift within himself. "Ella," Dominic said, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time since their conversation had begun. "What you did for my mother, it wasn't just a job. You did something no one else could have." Ella didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, her eyes steady on his, as though she were waiting for him to continue. But Dominic didn't know what else to say. He had no idea why this felt so different, why he felt so unsettled by her. He had never felt like this about anyone, especially not someone in her position. He looked away, as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't know what to do with this," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Ella remained silent, allowing the words to hang in the air. She understood the weight of the situation. She had always known her place in the household. She had always stayed in the background, doing her job without complaint, without expecting anything in return. But last night had changed everything. She had saved his mother's life, and in doing so, she had changed the dynamic between them. She had made Dominic see her in a way he never had before. It was an uncomfortable feeling, but it was also one she couldn't ignore. "I'm not asking for anything, Dominic," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I did what needed to be done because it was the right thing to do." Dominic felt a sharp pang in his chest. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know why, but they felt like a rebuke, a reminder that he had spent too long ignoring the people who mattered most. It made him feel vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to be. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions. But here, in this moment, he realized that Ella had taken control when he couldn't. She had stepped up in a way he hadn't even known was possible. He glanced back at her, his eyes searching hers. "I know," he said quietly. "I just don't understand why it had to be you." The question hung in the air, and Ella could see the turmoil in his eyes. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the tray in her hands, a small, thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "Because I've been here all along," she said finally, her voice gentle but certain. "I've been here, and I've seen everything. I've seen you, and I've seen your family." Dominic stared at her, his mind reeling. He had never considered that someone like Ella, someone who had always been in the background, could see so much, understand so much. She had been a constant in his life, and yet he had never truly seen her. Not until now. "I don't know what to say," he confessed, his voice low. "I don't know what any of this means." Ella met his gaze, her expression softer now, more understanding. "You don't have to say anything," she replied quietly. "Not yet." And with that, she turned back to the kitchen, as though the conversation had never happened, as though nothing had changed. But Dominic knew better. Everything had changed. And as he stood there, watching her move with the same grace and quiet strength that had first caught his attention, he realized that the walls he had built around himself were slowly beginning to crumble. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to face it, whatever it might be. The shift in his perception of Ella was undeniable, and as much as he tried to push it away, he couldn't. He didn't know how to navigate it, but one thing was certain. Ella had become someone he couldn't ignore, and for better or worse. That was a realization he would have to come to terms with. Days passed, but the silence in the mansion seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed, but he didn't know how to address it. Ella's presence had become more noticeable, more significant, and it unsettled him. It wasn't just the way she had saved his mother. It was the way she had looked at him, the way she had acted, so different from anyone else in his life. But despite his growing awareness of her, he kept his distance, focusing on his responsibilities, trying to ignore the growing tension that seemed to pulse between them. He told himself that it was all in his head. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Every time he saw Ella, his heart would race just a little faster, and his mind would wander to places he wasn't prepared to go. He had never felt like this about anyone before, and it terrified him. It was during a quiet evening, when Dominic was alone in his study, that he finally made the decision. He had to confront it. He couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. His feelings for Ella, the respect he had for her, the way she had earned her place in his life, it was all becoming too much to ignore. The door to his study creaked open, and he looked up, expecting it to be one of the staff bringing him some documents. But instead, it was Ella. She entered quietly, her presence filling the room with a calm that was both reassuring and unnerving. She wasn't carrying anything this time, and for a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other. Ella's expression was unreadable, her eyes calm, but there was something else there, something that Dominic couldn't quite decipher. "You wanted to speak with me, sir?" she asked, her voice steady, but there was a slight edge to it, as though she knew what was coming. Dominic swallowed, his throat dry. He had rehearsed what he was going to say a dozen times in his mind, but now that the moment had come, the words didn't seem to come easily. "Yes," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Please sit." He gestured to the chair across from him, and Ella nodded, taking a seat without hesitation. Dominic could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he watched her, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "About everything. About you, about what happened with my mother, and well, about how things have changed between us." Ella's gaze didn't waver. She looked at him with the same calm expression, but Dominic could see the faintest flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "And what do you think has changed?" she asked, her tone soft, but her words cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Dominic's chest tightened. He had been avoiding this conversation for so long, but now, with her sitting across from him, he couldn't avoid it any longer. "I think I've been wrong," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've spent my entire life seeing people as either assets or liabilities. I've built walls around myself to protect what I thought was important, and in doing that, I've pushed away people who actually matter. People like you." Ella's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't speak. Dominic continued, his words coming faster now, as though he couldn't stop them. "I never gave you the respect you deserve. I never saw you for who you are. I always just saw a nanny, someone in the background. But that's not fair. You're not just a servant, Ella. You're—" He stopped himself, unsure how to finish the sentence. "You're something more," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Ella's eyes softened, and for the first time since their conversation had started, she seemed to relax. "I don't expect anything from you, Dominic," she said quietly, her voice almost gentle. "I never have. I did what I did for your mother because I care, because it was the right thing to do." Dominic felt a pang in his chest. It wasn't the words he had been expecting, but they were the ones he needed to hear. "But it's not just about that," he said, leaning forward slightly. "It's about everything. About how you've always been there, in the background, doing your job with more grace and strength than I ever gave you credit for. And I've realized that I can't just go on pretending that nothing has changed, because it has." Ella looked away for a moment, as though considering his words. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, but there was a hint of something deeper behind it. "What do you want from me, Dominic?" she asked, her gaze returning to his. Dominic took a deep breath. He had thought about this moment for a long time, and now that it was finally here, he knew there was no turning back. "I want to start over," he said, his voice steady. "I want to know you for who you are, not just as someone who works for me. I want to change the way I've seen you, and I want to change the way I've seen myself." There was a long pause as Ella considered his words. Finally, she nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure what that means, Dominic," she said, her voice soft. "But I'm willing to find out." Dominic felt a weight lift from his shoulders, as though something had shifted inside him. He had taken the first step, and now, for the first time, he felt like he was no longer alone in this. They were in this together, and whatever the future held, He was ready to face it with her by his side. The following days felt different, but in a way that neither Dominic nor Ella could fully explain. The air in the mansion was still thick with unspoken words and quiet tension, but there was also something else, a subtle shift, a sense of change that neither of them could ignore. Dominic kept himself busy with work, handling the affairs of the family empire, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Ella. It wasn't just her actions in saving his mother's life. It was the way she had looked at him afterward, the way she had listened to him, the way she had quietly allowed him to speak his truth without judgment. It was something he hadn't realized he needed. The dynamic between them had changed, but it wasn't just about what had happened between them. It was about what was beginning to grow between them, something neither of them had anticipated. Dominic tried to focus on other things, to block out the nagging thoughts that had begun to occupy his mind, but it wasn't working. Every time he saw Ella, every time their eyes met, it was like a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. And the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. One afternoon, he found himself standing in front of the grand staircase, looking down into the foyer below. The mansion was quiet, but he knew Ella would be somewhere nearby, attending to her duties. She was always so composed, so steady, and yet, in the last few days, he had noticed a change in her as well. She seemed quieter than usual, more distant. Was it because of him? Because of the conversation they had shared? Dominic wasn't sure. He never had to worry about people before. His life had been built on control, on keeping everyone at arm's length. But Ella was different. She was no longer someone he could simply keep at a distance. He had invited change into his life, and now, he had to deal with the consequences. "Ella," he called out, his voice carrying through the hallway. She appeared almost instantly, her presence so quiet that it startled him. She was standing at the far end of the hallway, her back straight, her expression neutral, yet there was something in her eyes that told him she had been expecting him. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of something he couldn't quite place. "I wanted to talk to you," Dominic said, his words coming out slower than he intended. "About us. About what's been happening." Ella nodded, stepping closer but still maintaining the distance that had been between them for so long. She didn't say anything, but her eyes never left his. "I've been thinking," Dominic began, taking a deep breath. "I don't know what's happening between us, Ella, but I can't keep pretending that nothing has changed. I can't ignore what I feel anymore. And I can't keep pushing you away." Ella's gaze softened, though she remained silent. Dominic continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've always been in control of everything. My business, my family, my life. But you." He faltered for a moment, unsure how to put it into words. "You've made me realize that I've been living my life wrong. I've been avoiding what really matters. And now, after everything that's happened, after you've saved my mother's life, after you've been there in a way that no one else has, I don't know how to keep going without acknowledging that." Ella took a step forward, her gaze steady and calm. "I don't expect anything from you, Dominic," she said quietly. "I never have. I did what needed to be done because it was the right thing to do. Nothing more, nothing less." Her words made something inside him shift, but it also made him realize just how much she had already given. She wasn't asking for anything in return. She had done what she did because she believed it was the right thing to do, and that made her more powerful than anyone he had ever met. "But what if I want more?" Dominic asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ella stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "More?" she repeated, as though she were testing the word, turning it over in her mind. "What do you mean by that?" Dominic took another step forward, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what he was about to say, but he knew it was something he had to say. "I mean that I don't want this to be just a passing moment. I don't want to go back to the way things were. I want something real. Something more than just a business arrangement. Something more than just me sitting in that office, controlling everything." He paused, looking down at his hands, as if they were betraying him, showing the vulnerability he had spent so long hiding. "I want to know you, Ella. I want to be close to you, in a way that I've never been close to anyone before. I can't keep pretending that this, whatever this is nothing. It's not nothing. Not for me." Ella's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Dominic saw something in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. It was a vulnerability, a quiet understanding that mirrored his own. She stepped even closer, closing the gap between them, and for a moment, they simply stood there, inches apart, as if the entire world had paused around them. "You don't have to explain yourself, Dominic," she said softly. "I understand more than you think." And in that moment, Dominic realized that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. But for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone in that space. Ella had given him something he hadn't even known he needed. Permission to be vulnerable, permission to admit that maybe he didn't have all the answers. They stood there in silence, both of them unsure of what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, they were willing to face it together. The days after their conversation felt like they were trapped in some kind of limbo. Dominic couldn't shake the weight of the words he had said to Ella. He had bared a part of himself he had never let anyone see before, and now, he wasn't sure what to do with it. He had lived his entire life in control of his empire, of his family, of everything around him. But Ella had made him realize how much he had been missing, how much he had been hiding. It wasn't just about what she had done for his mother. It was about the way she had made him feel, the way she had shown him that there was more to life than power and control. He had never let anyone in, and yet, with Ella, it felt like he was learning to let go. It was terrifying, but it was also the most freeing thing he had ever experienced. Ella, on the other hand, had retreated into her usual calm, as though nothing had changed. She continued with her duties, tending to the family with the same quiet efficiency that had always defined her. But Dominic could see the subtle changes. She was different now. She wasn't as distant, but at the same time, she wasn't as close either. There was a kind of emotional barrier between them, and Dominic didn't know how to break it. She had allowed him to see a side of her, and now, he wanted to see more. But every time he tried to approach her, she seemed to pull back. It was as if she was waiting for him to make the next move. Dominic wasn't sure if he was ready for that. He had always been the one in control, but with Ella, it felt like everything was different. One evening, as the sun began to set, Dominic found himself walking through the garden of the mansion. The air was warm, the scent of flowers heavy in the evening breeze. He wasn't sure why he was out here, but something about the peacefulness of the garden helped him clear his mind. He had been avoiding Ella for the past few days, not knowing how to act, how to approach her after everything that had happened. But as he walked, he saw her standing by the fountain, her back to him. She was gazing down at the water, lost in thought. Dominic stopped for a moment, unsure if he should approach her. But then, something inside him urged him forward. He had come this far, and he couldn't keep running away from what he felt. He stepped closer, and she turned when she heard his footsteps. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both waiting for the other to break the silence. "Ella," Dominic said, his voice soft but steady. "We need to talk." Ella didn't move, but her gaze softened. "About what?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Dominic took a step closer, his heart racing. "About us. About everything that's happened. I can't keep pretending like I don't feel something, Ella." Ella's expression didn't change, but Dominic could see a flicker of emotion in her eyes. "You don't have to pretend, Dominic," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything from you." Her words were calm, but there was an underlying tension in her voice. It was as if she was holding something back, something she didn't want to say. Dominic's heart clenched. "I know you're not asking for anything," he said, his voice low. "But I am. I'm asking for more. I can't keep pretending that nothing has changed between us. I want to know you, Ella. I want to understand you. I want to stop hiding from what I feel." Ella took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving his. She seemed to be weighing his words, deciding whether or not to let him in. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what do you want from me, Dominic?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He didn't have an answer right away. He had never had to answer that question before. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions. But with Ella it was different. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I just know that I can't keep pretending that we're not connected. I can't ignore what's happening between us." Ella's eyes softened, but there was still a trace of hesitation in her gaze. "I don't want to hurt you, Dominic," she said quietly. "But I don't want to be part of a game either." Dominic's heart sank. "It's not a game, Ella," he said urgently. "I swear to you it's not. This is real." She looked at him for a long time, as if she were searching for something in his eyes. Finally, she nodded, her expression softening. "I believe you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need time, Dominic. I need to figure out what this means. What we mean. Dominic nodded, understanding. He didn't want to rush her, but he couldn't help the longing that surged inside him. He wanted more. He needed more. But for now, he would have to wait. He would have to let her decide what this was, and hope that she would choose to walk this path with him. Take all the time you need, he said, his voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. Ella looked at him for a moment longer before turning her gaze back to the fountain. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was filled with understanding. And in that moment, Dominic realized that sometimes the most important thing was simply to be there, without rushing, without forcing anything, just to be present. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could do that. He could be patient, and he could wait for her. He had never known peace like this before, and he wasn't about to lose it now. Days passed, and the silence between Dominic and Ella grew heavier with each moment they spent together. It was not an uncomfortable silence, but one filled with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Dominic had been patient, giving Ella the time she had asked for, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the moment was slipping away from him. He had never been good at waiting, especially when it came to something he wanted so badly. Ella had been distant, not cold, but guarded, as though she were still trying to process everything that had happened between them. Dominic couldn't blame her. He had taken a risk when he admitted how he felt, and she had been kind enough to allow him to speak his truth. But now, he was left wondering if it had been enough. He couldn't keep wondering. He had to know. One evening, after a long day of work, Dominic found himself walking through the mansion again, his mind racing. He had to see Ella. He had to know if there was something more between them, or if it had all been a fleeting moment of connection. As he walked, he passed the grand staircase and turned toward the garden. He hadn't seen Ella all day, and something inside him urged him to go out there, to find her and finally talk to her. He stepped into the garden, the air cool and crisp as the evening sky darkened above him. The faint scent of flowers lingered in the air, and the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze calmed his nerves, if only a little. He saw her then, standing by the fountain again, her posture as graceful and composed as ever. It was almost as if she was waiting for him. She didn't notice him at first, lost in her thoughts as she gazed down at the water, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lanterns scattered around the garden. For a moment, Dominic simply watched her, taking in the quiet strength she exuded. She was a woman of grace, of dignity, of power, something he had never truly seen before. And as he stood there, the realization hit him with full force. He wanted her, not just for a moment, but for something real, something lasting. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't just let her slip away. Ella, Dominic called softly, his voice carrying through the still air. She turned at the sound of his voice, her eyes meeting his. There was a quiet recognition in her gaze, but there was also something else, something unreadable. Dominic, she replied, her tone warm but cautious. She didn't step toward him, but neither did she pull away. They stood there for a moment, both unsure of what to say next, both aware of the weight of the moment. I've been thinking about what you said, Dominic said finally, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. About us. About everything. And I can't keep waiting. Ella's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't interrupt him. I don't want to wait anymore, Ella. I don't want to keep pretending that what happened between us was just a moment. It wasn't just a moment. It meant something to me. It meant everything. Ella remained silent, but there was a shift in her expression. She seemed to be weighing his words, considering something that had been weighing on her as well. Dominic took a step closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't hold back anymore. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to be with you. I want to see where this goes, Ella. I want to take that chance. With you. The words felt like they had been building inside him for days, and now that they were out, it was as if a weight had been lifted. He had said it. He had taken the leap. Now, it was her turn to decide. Ella looked at him for a long moment, her gaze steady and intense. Dominic could feel his pulse quicken, the uncertainty creeping back in. He had put himself out there, and now it was up to her. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. Dominic, she said, her eyes searching his. I never asked for this. I never wanted to complicate things. But you're right. Dominic's heart skipped a beat. Right? He repeated, unsure if he had heard her correctly. She nodded slowly, her expression serious. Right, she said. I've been trying to make sense of everything, trying to figure out if this is something I can allow myself to feel. But I can't deny it anymore. I can't keep pretending that I don't want this, too. Dominic's chest tightened as he took another step forward, his eyes locked on hers. So what does that mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It means, Ella began, her voice steady, that I'm willing to take a chance with you, Dominic. I'm willing to see where this goes. But it won't be easy. I won't let us fall back into old patterns. This is different. And it has to be different. Dominic's heart soared as the words sank in. She was willing. She was ready to take the next step with him. And he was ready, too. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, Dominic felt like he was on the right path. It will be different, he promised, his voice filled with determination. I won't let us fall back. I'll make sure of it. Ella smiled then, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was the first time in days that Dominic saw her truly smile, and it made everything feel like it was falling into place. He knew there would be challenges ahead. He knew their path wouldn't be easy. But in that moment, with Ella standing before him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what came next. The days that followed their quiet agreement were filled with a newfound sense of understanding. Yet there was a lingering tension between Dominic and Ella, one neither of them could fully shake. The mansion, once a place where Dominic controlled everything with an iron fist, now seemed different. It felt more like a home, though one that still carried a sense of hesitation in the air. For Dominic, the weight of his own emotions was something he hadn't anticipated. He had been the one to take the first step, to admit what he wanted, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was treading unfamiliar ground. It wasn't fear that gripped him now, but uncertainty. Ella was no longer just a figure in the background of his life. She was someone he had allowed in, and as much as he had wanted this change, he couldn't help but wonder if he was ready for it. He had spent so long being the one in control, and now, with Ella by his side, he wasn't so sure anymore. For Ella, the shift had been just as profound. She had allowed herself to feel something she had long kept buried, something she hadn't let herself entertain for years. Dominic had always been someone she admired from afar, but never someone she thought she could have a relationship with. He was the powerful Mafia boss, and she was simply the nanny, a role she had accepted without question. But after everything that had happened, after the way Dominic had opened up to her, she realized that what they shared was more than just a fleeting moment of connection. It was real, and it scared her. It was a risk, and risk was something she had avoided for most of her life. But with Dominic, everything felt different. One evening, as the golden hues of the setting sun poured through the windows of the mansion, Dominic found himself standing in his study, staring out at the sprawling grounds below. He had been wrestling with his thoughts all day, the uncertainty of his feelings for Ella overwhelming him at times. He needed clarity. He needed to know what this was. He couldn't go on living in this in-between state. It was time to make a decision. As he paced around the room, his mind was made up. He had to talk to Ella again. They couldn't keep going like this, unsure, hesitant, waiting for something to happen. He needed her to understand, and more importantly, he needed to understand her. Dominic walked swiftly to the kitchen, where he found Ella preparing dinner for the family. She looked up when he entered, her expression neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made his heart race. Ella, he began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. She turned, wiping her hands on the apron tied around her waist. Dominic, she replied, her voice warm but cautious. What's going on? He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before speaking. We need to talk, he said, his voice filled with determination. About us. Ella didn't say anything at first, but her eyes softened, and she stepped closer, as if waiting for him to continue. I know we agreed to take things slow, he started, his gaze never leaving hers. But I can't keep pretending that this is just going to stay in this gray area. I don't want to just go on with nothing changing. I want more. I want to know if you feel the same way. Ella's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she stood still, her eyes searching his, as though trying to read the depth of his words. Dominic, she paused, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what this is, either. I don't know where this is going. Dominic's chest tightened. He had expected hesitation, but hearing her admit it out loud made it all the more real. But, she continued, taking a step closer to him, I do know that what we have, it's not nothing. It's something. And it's something I want to explore. With you. Dominic's heart soared at her words. They weren't declarations of love, but they were enough. They were more than enough. They were the promise of something real, of something they could build together, without rushing or forcing anything. Ella didn't have all the answers, and neither did he. But for the first time, they were both willing to figure it out together. He reached out, his hand brushing hers, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she met his touch, her fingers intertwining with his. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. In that moment, Dominic knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. We don't have to have all the answers right now, he said softly, his voice filled with quiet resolve. But I'm not letting you go, Ella. Not now. Ella smiled, a smile that reached her eyes, one that he hadn't seen in days. It was small, but it was real, and it made everything feel more certain. Then let's take it one day at a time, she said, her voice steady now. Dominic nodded, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. This was just the beginning, and they had no idea what the future held, but they would face it together. As they stood there, in the quiet of the kitchen, with the world outside slipping away, Dominic realized that he had found something he had never expected to find. Something real. Something worth fighting for. The following days unfolded with an ease that Dominic had never imagined possible. The quiet understanding between him and Ella grew stronger, though their connection remained unspoken. The mansion, which had once felt cold and distant, now held a sense of warmth, a subtle shift that no one could quite put into words. For Dominic, the weight of his responsibilities seemed lighter. He found himself focusing more on the moments that mattered, those fleeting instances when Ella's presence seemed to fill the space around him, when their conversations lingered long after they had finished speaking. But the reality of their world still remained. Dominic knew that there were expectations, obligations that came with being who he was. And though Ella had become a significant part of his life, he couldn't forget the delicate balance he had to maintain. It wasn't just his family that demanded his attention. It was the life he had built, the empire he controlled. Yet, every time he saw Ella, every time their eyes met, those worries seemed to fade into the background. It was during a rare moment of downtime, a quiet evening after a long day of meetings and decisions, that Dominic found himself drawn to her once again. She had been quiet, more reserved than usual, but he knew that she was still processing everything. He had given her space, but the urge to talk, to understand her better, had grown too strong to ignore. He found her in the library, sitting by one of the large windows, reading. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her face, casting gentle shadows on her features. She looked peaceful, calm, lost in the pages of her book, yet there was something in the way she held herself that spoke volumes. Dominic hesitated for a moment, watching her. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, or if she was ready for more of what he had to offer. But as he stood there, something inside him told him this was the moment. Ella, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up from her book, her eyes meeting his with a calm that never ceased to impress him. Dominic, she replied, her voice steady, warm. She didn't ask what he wanted, but he could see the question in her eyes. I've been thinking, Dominic began, taking a step closer, his heart beating a little faster than usual. About everything. About us. And what this all means. Ella set the book down, her expression thoughtful. She had always been the quiet one, the one who listened more than she spoke, but he knew that when she spoke, her words were always well considered. What does it mean to you? She asked, her voice low, her eyes never leaving his. Dominic felt a pang in his chest. He had never been one to open up, to admit his feelings. But with Ella, it felt different. He wasn't afraid to speak the truth. It means more than I ever expected, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I never thought I would let someone in. I never thought I would let myself care about someone like this. But you've changed that. You've shown me something I didn't know I needed. Ella's gaze softened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She simply looked at him, as though weighing his words. Dominic could feel the weight of her silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of understanding, a quiet agreement that they were both on the same page. I never asked for any of this, she said finally, her voice soft. I never wanted things to be complicated. But I can't deny that what we have, it means something. It's real. And it scares me, too. Dominic took a deep breath, moving closer. I'm not going anywhere, Ella, he said softly. I want this. I want us. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it work. She looked at him, her eyes searching his, as if looking for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Dominic knew that this was what he wanted more than anything. Ella smiled then, a small, gentle smile that reached her eyes. I want this too, she said quietly. But I need to know that we're not rushing into something just because it feels right in the moment. I need to know that we're doing this for the right reasons, for both of us. Dominic nodded, his heart swelling with the depth of her words. We'll take it slow. We'll do this on our own terms, he said, his voice filled with certainty. But I need you to know that I'm in this, Ella. I'm all in. She stood up then, her presence filling the room, and as she stepped toward him, she reached out to take his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. She trusted him, and in that moment, Dominic realized that the feeling was mutual. Then let's take this one day at a time, Ella said, her voice steady and calm. Together, Dominic felt a sense of peace wash over him, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. This was what he wanted. This was what he needed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, with her. As they stood there, in the quiet of the library, the soft hum of the world, outside fading into nothingness, Dominic knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was all that mattered. The days following their conversation were both peaceful and filled with uncertainty. For Dominic and Ella, there was a new understanding between them, a quiet bond that neither had anticipated but both had come to appreciate. As they spent more time together, the mansion began to feel less like a place of cold power and more like a home, though the weight of what lay between them was still present. For Dominic, the conflict within himself had not dissipated completely. He had opened up to Ella in ways he had never allowed anyone to see. But he couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't moving fast enough, that perhaps he was still holding back. His thoughts were consumed with Ella, and the more time they spent together, the deeper the questions ran. He had always believed that control and power were the keys to success, but with Ella, he found himself questioning everything. Was he willing to truly let go of the very principles that had made him who he was? As he watched her move around the house, effortlessly taking care of every detail, he realized that the walls he had spent years building around his heart were starting to crumble. But he didn't know if he was ready for that yet. The following week, the situation between them came to a head. It was an evening like any other, but Dominic couldn't shake the growing tension between them. Ella had been quieter than usual, lost in her own thoughts, her distance palpable. She was giving him space, he realized, but it made him uncomfortable. He had come to depend on her presence, and yet, he wasn't sure how to bridge the gap that had slowly formed between them. He had always been the one to make decisions, to take charge, but now he found himself standing at the edge of something uncertain. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to address the distance between them. He couldn't go on pretending like it didn't exist. It was late in the evening when he sought her out, finding her in the sitting room, sitting by the fireplace with a book in her hands. The soft glow from the fire highlighted her features, making her seem almost ethereal, and for a moment, Dominic stood still, watching her. She looked so peaceful, so composed, and yet, there was something in her eyes that suggested she was carrying more than she let on. When she noticed him standing in the doorway, she looked up, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. They both knew why he was there. Ella, Dominic said, his voice low but steady. She put the book down and looked at him, her expression softening, but there was still that distance. Dominic, she replied, her voice calm but carrying an unspoken weight. We need to talk, he continued, his voice carrying more emotion than he intended. About everything. Ella nodded slightly, indicating he should sit. Dominic walked toward her, but as he did, he could feel the weight of the unspoken tension hanging in the air. He sat beside her, close but not too close, unsure of where to begin. I've been thinking, he said after a long pause, about what you said, about taking it one day at a time. And I realized something. Ella didn't interrupt, but she was clearly waiting for him to continue. I don't want to take it one day at a time anymore, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I can't keep pretending that this is just some passing phase. You mean more to me than that. I want this, Ella. I want us. and I don't want to wait any longer to see where this can go." There was silence between them, and for a moment, Dominic wasn't sure if he had said the right thing. He had put everything on the line, exposed himself in ways that terrified him. But the fear of uncertainty was nothing compared to the fear of losing her. Ella took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving his. "Dominic," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I've been afraid. Afraid that this might not be what I thought it was. Afraid that we might be rushing into something that could hurt us both." Dominic's heart sank, but he kept his focus on her, not letting his own fear show. "I understand that. I've been afraid, too. But I don't want to let fear control us anymore. I want to try. I want to know what this could be, and I need you to know that I'm here every step of the way." Ella's eyes softened, and for the first time in days, she reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I'm here too," she whispered. "I just need time to trust that this isn't something that will fall apart." Dominic squeezed her hand, his heart racing. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. He knew that there would be challenges ahead, but in that moment, with Ella sitting beside him, everything felt possible. "Then let's take it slow, together," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "No rush. Just us, figuring this out, one step at a time." Ella nodded, her fingers still intertwined with his. "One step at a time," she agreed, her voice steady. Dominic leaned back, the weight in his chest lifting slightly. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. And as he looked at Ella, he knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. Weeks passed since their quiet, pivotal conversation, and in that time, Dominic and Ella navigated the delicate balance of building something real between them. The mansion, once a place dominated by coldness and routine, now held a warmth, a sense of shared space that neither of them had expected. They spent their days together, getting to know one another in ways that surprised them both. Dominic found himself relaxing in her presence, something he hadn't allowed himself in years. He had always prided himself on his ability to control everything. But with Ella, he felt like he could breathe without needing to maintain the constant vigilance that had once consumed him. Ella, for her part, had opened herself up more than she ever thought she could. Her walls had always been high, built from years of protecting herself from a world that never quite seemed to see her for who she was. But with Dominic, things were different. He didn't look at her like everyone else did. He saw her, really saw her, and it made her feel valued in a way she hadn't known she could feel. The tension that had hung between them before was gone now, replaced with something solid, something they both could rely on. They were no longer tiptoeing around their feelings. They were building something together, step by step. It was, in the quiet moments, the ones when they didn't need to speak to understand each other, that Dominic knew this was something real. He had never allowed himself to feel vulnerable, never let anyone in to this extent, but with Ella, he wanted to. He didn't want to go back to the way things had been. And Ella, despite her lingering fears, had come to realize the same thing. She had never thought she could allow herself to trust someone so completely, but with Dominic, she couldn't ignore the pull. She had been holding on to control, keeping her distance, but now she was willing to see where this would go. The night it all came to a head wasn't dramatic. It wasn't filled with grand gestures. It was simple. A quiet evening, just the two of them, sitting in the garden of the mansion. The stars were out, the night air cool and refreshing. They were talking about everything and nothing all at once, their words flowing freely, like they had all the time in the world. But in that moment, Dominic realized he had waited long enough. He turned to her, his heart in his chest, his words coming easily now. "Ella, I don't want to wait anymore," he said, his voice soft but steady. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice low. Dominic took her hand, gently pulling her closer to him. "I mean that I don't want to keep wondering what could be," he said, his heart racing. "I want this. I want you. I don't want to wait for something that feels so right. I'm ready, and I need to know if you are too." Ella's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him, searching his eyes for the truth. Dominic wasn't the kind of man who spoke lightly, and she could see that this wasn't a moment he was taking for granted. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm ready too," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet of the night. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The moment stretched between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the culmination of everything that had come before, the beginning of something new, something they had both quietly hoped for but hadn't dared to believe could happen. Dominic leaned in then, his forehead resting gently against hers, his breath mingling with hers. "Then we'll do this together," he murmured, his voice filled with tenderness. "No more waiting. Just us." Ella nodded, a soft smile curving her lips, and for the first time in a long time, Dominic felt a sense of peace settle over him. They didn't need to know what the future held. They didn't need to have all the answers. They had each other, and that was enough. And as they sat there, under the vast expanse of stars, everything else faded away. The mansion, the power, the control, it all felt distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the quiet promise they had made to each other. They would face whatever came next, together. Immerse yourself in this gripping tale of love, transformation, and vulnerability in this captivating romance story. Follow Dominic and Ella as they navigate the complexities of their feelings for one another, from uncertainty to undeniable connection. In this romance story, the power dynamics shift as Dominic, a powerful mafia boss, begins to see the woman who has quietly worked for him in an entirely new light. Their journey is one of self-discovery, trust, and emotional depth, as they slowly break down the walls they've built around themselves. If you love romance stories filled with emotional tension and genuine connections, this one will captivate you. With every passing moment, their relationship grows, and the raw vulnerability they both experience creates a magnetic pull between them. It's a tale that reminds us of the power of love, honesty, and the courage to face your fears. Get lost in this emotional journey, where the line between power and vulnerability blurs, and where two people find strength in each other. This romance story is a beautiful reminder that love can change everything, even for those who never believed it was possible. Don't miss out on this unforgettable journey through the heart of romance.